Well, 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 if it isn't Alice walking right at the end of a nostalgia event to deploy a tactical lore nuke in the middle of the library after nuking all the fish with Klee. Take a listen.
The Hexen Circle has been observing its energies for a long time, and I think Barbeloth's interpretation is the most accurate. The essence of the abyss lies in the hatred carried by all the fates that will not come to pass. This world is filled with conflicting elements. That one thing should happen signifies that a different possibility has been eliminated.
According to Barbeloth, as relayed by Alice, the phenomenon known as the Abyss is the manifestation of resentment and hatred from all the possibilities that failed to transpire in reality. And by extension, those become the unrealized possibilities relegated into the Void Realm. As such, the Abyss constantly seeks to invade reality to destroy it and consolidate it into itself. Think of it like a devil condemned in hell who cannot bear to see others living in peace and bliss while he suffers abandonment and rejection by God, discarded in a realm of loneliness and darkness. So the devil plots and schemes to manipulate the material realm and all those who live in it, and drag them down to his hell so that they too may become discarded possibilities with no potential. Of course, in my analogy, the devil is the abyss itself, and hell is the void realm where it resides and from which it emerges. The material realm constitutes the light realm as well as the human realm, which is made from the light realm where life and potential exist, while God in this case would be the more nebulous concept of fate, which on Teyvat is not so nebulous as it happens to be quite synonymous with the first descender, the heavenly principles. You see, the Heavenly Principles was also known as Destiny during Genshin Impact's CBT. This makes perfect sense when you think about it. For as the ultimate authority over Irminsul and the laws of Teyvat, the first Descender is the god who dictates the flow of history and fate, a role symbolized through their dominion as the god of logic and reason. Therefore, they are also the ones who dictate all the possibilities that come to pass and all those that don't on Teyvat. And as we learn from Barbeloth, the resentment of all the failed possibilities become one with the essence of the Abyss. This is such an incredible lore revelation, since it somehow manages to elucidate to us the source and objectives of the story's main antagonistic force in a precise and succinct manner, while simultaneously telling us absolutely nothing new at all. I am not joking, everything we learned about the Abyss during Homeward He Who Caught the Wind has already been presented fully throughout the game's lifespan, with most of it being shown way earlier, between versions 1.3 to 3.3. All Alice did was put everything together in a concise, clear statement, which is still pretty useful as it eliminates confusion and need for speculation. The idea of the Abyss as a force born from resentment and curses is ancient. I actually covered this topic a number of times in my past videos, largely going off of Skirk's explanation of curses to Neuvillette, in combination with what the Traveler and Shao found in the subspace of the Fantastic Compass. Long story short, my initial suspicion was that the Abyss is a malevolent force composed of the souls and remnants of all the discarded life forms and concepts that were destroyed and cast out of Teyvat by the Heavenly Principles. In other words, under that view, the Void Realm would have been a sort of cosmic trash can where all the heretics and opponents of Celestia's order were relegated after their exile or execution, and those anguished souls would eventually accumulate, forming the abyssal calamity out of their resentment. Now, this old view of mine, which I presented previously on this channel, turned out to be not too far off from Barbeloth's explanation. However, the crucial distinction lies in the fact that the Abyss doesn't actually consist of the souls of slain heretics, but is rather an amalgamation of all the different possibilities associated with those people, as well as everyone around them, whose outcomes will never be realized in reality. The hatred and resentment of failed outcomes born from not being chosen, as Paimon puts it. Nothing truly new, but it's still an extremely useful confirmation if you ask me, as it allows us to confidently put much of the old lore we know regarding the Abyss into proper context. And it's about time we revisit those foundational pillars of the story. The main reason I wanted to discuss what Alice said regarding the Abyss's nature is because it finally gives me a proper excuse to yap about Xiao, and this has been a long time coming, since Xiao happens to be my second favorite character in Genshin Impact after Morax. So dedicating a whole topic around him is something I've been meaning to do for a while now. Luckily, Xiao also happens to be one of the favorite characters of the developers, since, in case you didn't know, he was among the very first characters they ever designed for the game, and his existence was instrumental in not only establishing the identity of the mighty and illuminated Adepti, but also the Archon War itself. That's right, one of the most important events in Genshin's history was initially conceptualized to serve as background lore for Xiao, to give him an origin story and a purpose. Since then, the Archon War has, of course, long since evolved into our modern-day understanding of it as a heavily tumultuous period of Teyvat's history, where the Primordial One, Pitkamunen, killed the third Descender and divided his power into rewards for the 7 demon gods who emerged victorious from that era of conflict. The fact that this incredibly intricate portion of the game's lore, involving dozens of demon gods and factions, started out as a fluff lore for the young warrior character concept, later known as Xiao, puts into perspective just how much a project changes as it progresses through development. Cool stuff. Oh, and everything I just mentioned regarding the Archon War, the Third Descender, and Xiao is all directly relevant to what Alice tells the Traveler about the Abyss. Nothing here is a tangent or filler, so pay attention and stick with me. After emerging victorious in the Archon War and ascending to the throne of the Earth, Morax left behind him a long trail of defeated monsters, dragons, and demon gods. To cleanse the land from their residual defilement, the Lord of Geo employed an elite group of Adepti known as the Yaksha, with the foremost of them being the 5 generals, Bonanus, Indarius, Minogius, Alatus, and Bosacius. As they fought against the resentment left behind by all the slain gods and disfigured creatures that emerged from them, the Yaksha slowly accumulated spiritual filth in the form of something called Karmic Debt. And this is where stuff starts to make sense. In our real history, karma itself is a philosophical and theological concept originating in South Asia, specifically from ancient Hinduism and Buddhism. To put it concisely, the concept of karma was refined over time in Buddhist philosophy, where it came to represent the consequences of intentional actions. How one's thoughts, words, and deeds shape future experiences through a chain of cause and effect. Rather than being simple punishment or reward, karma is primarily about intention. Actions driven by greed, hatred, or ignorance lead to suffering, while actions rooted in wisdom and compassion lead towards liberation. It's worth noting that karma is not fate. The idea here isn't that everything is predetermined, it's that past actions influence present conditions, and present choices continue to shape the future. So, not fate, but causality. Going back to Teyvat, Barbeloth states that the Abyss's essence bears the hatred of all the fates that will not come to pass, effects that never occurred as a result of their causes not taking place. Naturally, the ones who dictate which effects take place are those who make the choices that cause them across time, be it mortals or gods. By that logic, when someone dies in the Hoyoverse, the possibilities associated with their choices and actions are eliminated as well. And in Liyue, the Vigilant Yaksha, through their duty, accumulate the resentment left behind by such failed causalities in the form of Karmic Debt, slowly stacking and driving them into insanity. It could be the case that the amount of karmic resentment contributed by an entity to the Abyss directly corresponds to the degree of influence that said entity would have otherwise had on the history of reality had it continued living up to a certain point. Of course, one's capacity to influence the world directly scales with the amount of power they possess. An ordinary mortal, let's say a shoemaker, would have a modest influence on the fates of those around him, mainly his immediate family, friends, and customers. For instance, the shoemaker's decision to fix someone's favorite pair of shoes before a certain date could provide that final bit of confidence the person needed to attend an event that they would have otherwise skipped on, where they end up meeting an important person and setting off a new chain of events in history. Now, contrast this with a possibility where the shoemaker didn't prioritize that customer's pair of shoes, leading to them passing on the event and never meeting that important person there. These are two distinct causalities that cannot coexist in reality. For one to materialize means that the other is to be destroyed and discarded into the abyss, and our humble shoemaker would have a hand in dictating which outcome is realized. Still, a shoemaker can only do so much. However, a brave and heroic knight could surely have a far greater influence on fate. After all, this is someone who can save or end lives with the swing of his blade, and whose deeds are to be remembered in songs and poems. Now, a god would naturally have even greater influence on history, with countless possibilities resting on their every choice. Just imagine the number of outcomes that are silenced the moment such entities are felled. Another perspective that we can use to better understand the Abyss is by viewing its struggle with the physical world as a conflict between reality and unreality. Remember how the founder of the Abyss, Clothar Albrecht, told the Traveler's sibling that Khaenri'ah sought them due to believing that they represented new and different possibilities for their kingdom, stating as well that whoever controls the Abyss controls everything. And since we have the proper context behind what Clothar was talking about, King Irminsul's intentions behind using the Traveler's sibling as a conduit for controlling the Abyss became very clear. Bound within a closed world that operates through a predictive system of fate using the false sky and the ley lines, Irmin, and by extension the Khaenri'ah elites, vied for a way to control the chaotic Abyss, since it represented different possibilities against Teyvat's fixed and unchanging fate. This could explain why the last king of the Eclipse dynasty bore the name of Irminsul, after the World Tree, likely invoking his attempt to weaponize the hatred of all failed causalities found in the Abyss to overturn the fixed fate imposed upon Teyvat by the heavenly principles. This is also likely the freedom which the Khaenri'ahs wanted, the freedom to dream of all the boundless possibilities that can be brought forth by stabilizing the manifestation of causal chaos. As the Twilight Sword Dainsleif puts it, that freedom to dream was stripped away from humanity by the Primordial One, who silenced the infinite potentials, innovations, and options for the sake of protecting its progeny within the sheltered eternity of its eggshell, creating a world disconnected from the rest of the universe, and a dream that belongs to none other than itself. Of course, attempting to manipulate and potentially weaponize such tremendous forces can easily backfire and lead to disaster. Humans are excellent at engineering their environments to suit their needs. One could even easily argue that this talent is part of their very biology, combined with the accumulation of knowledge and wisdom. However, humans are not always successful at carving nature to suit their needs, and when they fail, even by slight miscalculations, the results can be catastrophic. The Abyss found in the Void Realm is a very dangerous and volatile force to control. It may grant boundless possibilities, but it can also easily destroy life, given how its very essence, being based on hatred, can work to amplify mortal obsession and paranoia. We got a small glimpse of this abyssal property during the Archon quest All Fires Fuel the Flame, where the Traveler spent some time helping cure a number of Natlanese people who were afflicted with abyssal corrosion syndrome following Gsoithoth's invasion. The abyssal corrosion syndrome induced sinister hallucinations in the minds of its victims, leveraging their deepest fears to terrorize them with illusions of outcomes that never came to pass in reality, yet they were possibilities that those people were horrified of nonetheless. Mind you, this is similar to what we saw happen in the subspace of the Fantastic Compass, where each of the heroes was shown an illusion built on their fears, and the traveler's illusion displayed their sibling upon a backdrop of the abyss itself. I wonder if the subspace of the Fantastic Compass is similar in principle to the dream bubble Alice and Nicole made in that sense. By its nature, the Abyss works to amplify people's desires and obsessions to unreasonable levels, just as it did with the Conrian sinner Rerir, using the memory of his fiancée Thelindis as a tool to drive him into insanity by feeding his delusions of finding her once more. This is an extremely important detail, since it touches on one of the oldest and most fundamental concepts in Genshin Impact, which is the idea that visions feed off of people's ambitions, while delusions feed off of their obsessions. This juxtaposition is integrated into Genshin's world building as well as its gameplay mechanics. Those whose ambitions reach the heavens are bestowed with divine eyes known as visions by the elemental sovereigns, representing their potential as allogenes who can ascend to godhood. On the other hand, delusions, as they are manufactured by the Fatui, are artificial elemental foci that rely on their users' obsessions. Now, I know that the distinction between ambitions and obsessions is difficult to pinpoint, as the two can be situationally interchangeable, more so than what most people realize or even admit. To put it concisely though, ambition is a goal-oriented drive grounded in reality, whereas obsession is a compulsive fixation detached from it. Ambitions are structured, adaptable, and ultimately life-affirming. They push an individual to grow, to strive, and to overcome limitations, while still remaining anchored to reason and the world as it is. An ambitious person can reassess, change direction, and even let go when necessary, because their desire is governed by purpose rather than dependency. Obsession, by contrast, is rigid and self-consuming. It does not seek growth, but satisfaction at any cost, often ignoring reality altogether. Where ambition elevates the individual, obsession traps them, turning a desire into a necessity and a goal into an absolute. This is precisely why delusions are so dangerous. They do not empower potential, they exploit fixation, feeding on the user until nothing remains but the very desire that consumed them. It's currently unclear if obsessions that feed the Fatui's delusions are the same kind of obsessions that the Abyss feeds on to heighten its victims' paranoia. Regardless, the two mechanics appear to be notably similar. Both are, after all, created from the resentment left behind by unfulfilled possibilities, which can be connected to powerful and influential entities. Snezhnayans drew upon the remains of the fallen serpent god Orobashi to manufacture the Fatui's artificial elemental foci, and beyond the obvious consequences that Sangonomiya soldiers who wielded these delusions suffered severe physical and mental deterioration, there is something far more insidious at play. When Scaramouche intercepted the traveler within the factory, he drew attention to the overwhelming hatred saturating the environment. A hatred so potent that even the traveler themselves succumbed to its influence. Once again, these are extremely similar effects to the nature of the Abyss as Barbeloth explains it through Alice, and indeed the Karmic Debt that drove the Vigilant Yaksha into insanity. What's fascinating in context is the fact that all of these observations align with what happened to King Ermin during his own research into the Abyss, according to the Conrian sinner Rerir, who remembers how King Ermin fell deeper into paranoia the greater his obsession became with finding a way to control the all-engulfing darkness, until Ermin was driven into a state of madness which blinded his mental faculties. And we all know what happened to his kingdom shortly after. The same could be said about the Vigilant Yaksha. As the strongest of the Adepti, they were warriors of great renown, who fought for hundreds of years to destroy delusions and resentment from the land of Liyue. But with every remnant of a fallen god cleansed, the Yaksha's minds and spirits drifted ever closer into oblivion. One by one, the Karmic Depths eroded their minds, stripping away their identities and a sense of self until they became calamities upon the land themselves, leaving behind but a single one still standing. Jinpeng, also known as General Alatus, the Conqueror of Demons. Demons here is a very apt descriptor for characterizing the raw hatred, resentment, and perhaps even jealousy born by the Abyss towards reality and life. A degree of sinister hatred that can only be compared to that of a demonic entity. Take Roland, for example. The version of him whom Varka confronted inside of Andreas' domain was not the real bloodstained knight, but rather a manifestation of his hatred and desperation formed by the Abyss to lead the wild hunt in place of the imprisoned Rerir. Knowing this, it becomes all the more questionable to consider how the Traveler's sibling and the Abyss Order will likely seek to weaponize such demonic power in their endeavor of recreating the Kingdom of Khaenri'ah, especially now that they have obtained its blueprint using the Loom of Fate. Finally, it's worth taking a moment to go over how Barbeloth's explanation of the Abyss's nature affects our understanding of Genshin's overall world building, particularly that of its ancient history. The Abyss's essence is the hatred of all fates that could not come to pass, a hatred directed towards all that which does exist in reality. Certain beings, like deities for example, can have a greater degree of influence on causality. As such, any failed possibilities associated with them will naturally feed the Abyss with a greater amount of resentment in the Void Realm. We see this with Dvalin and how the version of him from a failed outcome where he was not defeated by the Traveler manifested as an embryonic abyssal dragon who attempted to take over the dream bubble made by Nicole and Alice. Now consider this. After the first Descender arrived in the world of the Moon Sisters, it slowly and steadily took over their planet, cast the ancient dragons aside, defeated their sovereigns, and eventually killed their king Nibelung and his daughters, the Moon Sisters themselves. The first Descender succeeded in its conquest of the Light Realm, leading to the creation of Teyvat and the proliferation of humankind. The Primordial One's divine will became reality in accordance with its heavenly principles. Simultaneously, any future where Nibelung would have returned from his journey to usher the ancient dragons beyond the world and into the stars, as he had once vowed to the Voyager Sutervoinen, was eliminated from ever happening. If the hatred of a renowned hero can feed the essence of the Abyss, while a god can turn it into a calamity, then one can only imagine what great vengeance can be born in the Abyss from the hatred of an entire fallen world and its supreme, radiant, and proud deity. And what that could possibly do to the Abyss. The answer is something that I will discuss in a different video, because we have reached the end of this one. So as always, huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the next one. Something big is coming, so stay tuned and of course, take care.